Those who desire to be Jesus' disciples must learn Jesus' teachings and his ways and imitate him by walking as he walked. 1 John chapter 2, verses 3 through 6, and 1 Corinthians chapter 11 and verse 1 teach us that. Now, one aspect of Jesus' life that must be imitated is the way in which Jesus served. Therefore, we must consider scriptures that give us insight into the way Jesus served God and the way he served people around him so that we can learn then how to walk in his footsteps in the way that we serve. So let's consider some scriptures that help us to see these different aspects of Jesus' service. Let's begin in Hebrews chapter 10, and we'll read the first 12 verses. It says, "Since the law has only a shadow of the good things to come, and not the reality itself of those things, it can never perfect the worshipers by the same sacrifices they continually offer year after year. Otherwise, wouldn't they have stopped being offered, since the worshipers purified once and for all would no longer have any consciousness of sins? But in the sacrifices there is a reminder of sins year after year. For it is impossible for the blood of bulls and goats to take away sins. Therefore, as he was coming into the world, he said, 'You did not desire sacrifice and offering, but you prepared a body for me. You did not delight in whole burnt offerings and sin offerings. Then I said, See, it is written about me in the scroll, I have come to do your will, God.'" After he says above, "You did not desire or delight in sacrifices and offerings, whole burnt offerings and sin offerings, which are offered according to the law," he then says, "See, I have come to do your will." He takes away the first to establish the second. By this will, we have been sanctified through the offering of the body of Jesus Christ once for all time. Every priest stands day after day ministering and offering the same sacrifices time after time, which can never take away sins. But this man, after offering one sacrifice for sins forever, sat down at the right hand of God. When Jesus came to this earth, he came to serve by doing the will of God. You know, you think about, he could have come and done a lot of things. He could have come and been focused on his own fleshly desires, his own earthly pleasures. But he came, this passage says, to do the will of God. He was tempted in all the same points as we are, yet without sin, Hebrews chapter 4 and verses 14 through 16. The writer of Hebrews here demonstrated how the sacrifices required by the law of Moses were ultimately insufficient to take away sins, and they were only a shadow of what was to come, as there was this system that had been placed, of course, in the Old Testament law. But they really couldn't accomplish the forgiveness of sins of themselves. They were just foreshadowing this better that was to come. Still, notice that there were priests who ministered. Let's focus on that word for a moment. The idea of ministering is to serve. And these priests served day after day to offer these sacrifices. But both the plan of God, Ephesians 3 verses 8 through 11, and all mankind were dependent upon Jesus' willingness to be a servant. This whole passage helps us to see how Jesus came. And if you go back into the text of Hebrews even further, you see more about his willingness to be this high priest. So he came and laid himself down serving by focusing on the will of God, by giving his life. And so if Jesus had chosen to serve himself above the will of the Father, if Jesus had chosen to serve himself above the needs of people, then we would have no hope. Consequently, since Jesus made such a great sacrifice to present himself as a servant in this way, despite being God, not considering equality with God as something to be grasped, but instead came and presented himself as a servant, willing to be obedient even to the point of death on the cross. And since Jesus did this, then certainly his disciples must serve the will of God and must serve others through our lives. How could Jesus come and offer himself in this sacrificial way as a servant? And then his disciples choose to live in a flesh-focused, selfish kind of way, not concerned about the will of God or not concerned about others. Jesus provides this model for service. But let's go to the book of Luke and let's notice an example during the course of Jesus' life here on earth. We see in Luke chapter 4, let's read verses 38 through 44. It says, "After he left the synagogue, he entered Simon's house. Simon's mother-in-law was suffering from a high fever, and they asked him about her. So he stood over her and rebuked the fever, and it left her. She got up immediately and began to serve them. When the sun was setting, all those who had anyone sick with various diseases brought them to him. As he laid his hands on each one of them, he healed them. Also, demons were coming out of many, shouting and saying, 'You are the Son of God.' But he rebuked them and would not allow them to speak because they knew he was the Messiah. When it was day, he went out and made his way to a deserted place. But the crowds were searching for him. They came to him and tried to keep him from leaving them. But he said to them, 'It is necessary for me to proclaim the good news about the kingdom of God to the other towns also, because I was sent for this purpose.' And he was preaching in the synagogues of Judea." Now, as you look through this text, what hopefully you recognize is that Jesus served in at least three ways in this text. First, Jesus served the needs of Peter's mother-in-law by healing her. Now, in doing so, he made a difference certainly in her life, but you think about how Jesus' act of service here also made a difference in the lives of others as well. How about the lives of Peter and Peter's wife and any other people, family members, friends, neighbors, whoever, who may have been impacted by her being made well? So there's one act of service that Jesus demonstrated. A second act of service is that Jesus served the needs of many in Capernaum by healing the various types of sicknesses, diseases, and afflictions that were brought to him. And you can see in that text how Jesus healed many people who were brought to him. And so you think about each one of those individuals and their family members and their friends and so forth, and all the people who were impacted by Jesus, each one that Jesus healed. But in this, I also want you to notice something else. Jesus' heart was willing to do what he could for others, even potentially late into the night. You know, the passage talks about when the sun was setting. You also can see over in Mark chapter 1, verses 32 and 34, it makes reference to these events beginning in the evening, and the whole town had come out to him. Now, I don't know how long it took, but sometimes we may like to kind of hold certain time for ourselves. We'll serve people at whatever time, maybe in designated hours, but then we reserve and we don't want to be bothered at other times. Jesus was willing to serve even at this late hour. And also, I want you to note that in doing this, Jesus also served God by fulfilling prophecy concerning the Messiah healing. Matthew chapter 8, verses 16 and 17 makes that connection with this event. Jesus fulfilled prophecy. So he's serving people. He's even serving potentially late into the evening, and he is serving God as he is fulfilling prophecy. But there's a third way that we see in this text that Jesus served, and that is Jesus served the spiritual needs of people through preaching the gospel, the good news about God's kingdom. But again, I want you to notice that certainly as he served those people, as he, in these ways that we have talked about, but we also need to recognize he served the needs of not just those people, but he served the needs of people in various places by traveling to them. Now, you step back from all of this. Certainly no one today can serve others by taking away their diseases and afflictions. We might like to do that, but we can't serve other people in those ways. But we can imitate Jesus' service by identifying whatever we can do for people and by doing the best we can in that. It may be that we're praying for them or visiting them or just doing something to help them. And certainly we can serve by preaching the same message about God's kingdom that Jesus preached. So we can see in this passage, these three distinct ways that Jesus served. But now let's go further. And let's go into Luke, the 8th chapter. And let's read verses 40 through 56. We see a couple of examples of Jesus' service on this particular occasion. It says, "When Jesus returned, the crowd welcomed him, for they were all expecting him. Just then a man named Jairus came. He was a leader of the synagogue. He fell down at Jesus' feet and pleaded with him to come to his house, because he had an only daughter about 12 years old, and she was dying. While he was going, the crowds were nearly crushing him. A woman suffering from bleeding for 12 years, who spent all she had on doctors, and yet could not be healed by any, approached from behind and touched the end of his robe. Instantly her bleeding stopped. 'Who touched me?' Jesus asked. When they all denied it, Peter said, 'Master, the crowds are hemming you in and pressing against you.' 'Someone did touch me,' said Jesus. 'I know that power has gone out from me.' When the woman saw that she was discovered, she came, trembling, and fell down before him. In the presence of all the people, she declared the reason she had touched him and how she was instantly healed. 'Daughter,' he said to her, 'your faith has saved you. Go in peace.' While he was still speaking, someone came from the synagogue leader's house and said, 'Your daughter is dead. Don't bother the teacher anymore.' When Jesus heard it, he answered him, 'Don't be afraid. Only believe, and she will be saved.' After he came to the house, he let no one enter with him except Peter, John, James, and the child's father and mother. Everyone was crying and mourning for her. But he said, 'Stop crying, because she is not dead, but asleep.' They laughed at him because they knew she was dead. So he took her by the hand and called out, "Child, get up." Her spirit returned, and she got up at once. Then he gave orders that she be given something to eat. Her parents were astounded, but he instructed them to tell no one what had happened. Notice, Jesus did not just serve the needs of crowds and masses of people. There are times where we see Jesus and he is interacting with a large number of people. I think about the feeding of the multitudes, for example. We see crowds on this occasion in the early part of the text. Jesus returned and the crowd welcomed him. They were expecting him. But Jesus wasn't just focused on crowds. Rather, each act of service focused on the individual who was being served. I want you to notice how Jesus was willing to go away from the crowd to serve Jairus. And similarly, we must be able to see the individual needs of people who are around us. And then I also want you to notice that during Jesus' journey, notice how he was willing to interrupt what he was doing to address the needs of the woman with the bleeding issue who had touched him. Sometimes we get so busy in what we're doing that we're not willing to interrupt the things that are going on in our lives. We must be willing to interrupt our plans. We must be willing to interrupt our activities, even good activities, to sacrificially serve others we encounter. Also, I want you to notice that Jesus went all the way with Jairus to do whatever he could, despite being given the opportunity to stop short. Remember when it was announced that the girl had died? Don't bother the teacher anymore. Jesus could have stopped. And probably no one would have blamed him. But Jesus didn't stop. Jesus went all the way with him. And likewise, we should not be quick to give up in our service when greater challenges strike, but instead must be willing to go to the end of what we can do for others. No, we can't raise someone from the dead like Jesus could. But Jesus went to the end of what he could do in even raising her from the dead. Sometimes we stop too quickly in our service and we don't go as far as we could because things become challenging, things become difficult for us. Through all these things, I want you to notice that service requires effort. It requires sacrifice. It requires action. That's what you see in Jesus serving. Jesus didn't just come and express words of affection and care. Jesus sacrificed. Jesus gave effort, and Jesus made actions. And so must we if we want to walk in the footsteps of our Master in how we serve. Well, next, let's go to the book of Mark. Let's look at chapter 10 and verses 13 through 16. It tells us on this occasion, people were bringing little children to him, that's to Jesus, in order that he might touch them. But the disciples rebuked them. When Jesus saw it, he was indignant and said to them, "Let the little children come to me. Don't stop them, because the kingdom of God belongs to such as these. Truly I tell you, whoever does not receive the kingdom of God like a little child will never enter it." After taking them in his arms, he laid his hands on them and blessed them. Now, certainly as people were bringing their children to Jesus so he could touch and bless them, Jesus' disciples rebuked them. Perhaps these disciples saw Jesus' work. I mean, think about all the things Jesus was doing and needed to do and all of these things. And perhaps his disciples saw Jesus' work as he doesn't have time for little infants, children. Luke 18, verse 5, I believe it makes reference to them as infants. Although these were insignificant in the eyes of most people, Jesus took time for them. In fact, Jesus saw the kingdom of God as belonging to little children, and he urged people to become like little children. Matthew chapter 18, verses 1 through 4, humble yourself like a little child. Mark 9, verses 33 to 37. There are different passages, and we see this emphasis that's made. And therefore, the true heart of a servant doesn't just serve those who are seen as important in society, but he even serves those who are insignificant, or even those who are despised in society. Jesus served those who many did not even have time for. Next, let's notice later in Mark chapter 10. Let's go to verses 35 through 45. In that text, it says, James and John, the sons of Zebedee, approached him and said, Teacher, we want you to do whatever we ask you. What do you want me to do for you? He asked them. They answered, Allow us to sit at your right and at your left in your glory. Jesus said to them, You don't know what you're asking. Are you able to drink the cup I drink, or to be baptized with the baptism I am baptized with? We are able, they told him. Jesus said to them, You will drink the cup I drink, and you will be baptized with the baptism I am baptized with. But to sit at my right or left is not mine to give. Instead, it is for those for whom it has been prepared. When the 10 disciples heard this, they began to be indignant with James and John. Jesus called them over and said to them, You know that those who are regarded as rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and those in high positions act as tyrants over them. But it is not so among you. On the contrary, whoever wants to become great among you will be your servant, and whoever wants to be first among you will be a slave to all. For even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many. You can see in this text how Jesus' disciples often misunderstood greatness in God's kingdom. You can go back even to Mark chapter 9 and verses 33 through 37, and they're arguing about who is, which one of them is going to be the greatest, or which is the greatest. So Jesus' disciples, this was an issue of contention among them. And they misunderstood greatness in the kingdom of God. Specifically, James and John, with the encouragement of their mother, according to Matthew chapter 20, verses 20 and 21. James and John requested that they be given prominent places in the kingdom. Jesus, however, demonstrated that true greatness in his kingdom, it's achieved through serving. You think about the way that a lot of people thought greatness was obtained, lifting ourselves up, putting ourselves above others, and having great authority and power and those sorts of things. Jesus says greatness is measured through service. Because this is the way of the Master, the way of Jesus. Jesus did not come to this earth for people to serve him, That's not what you see. Think about the body of work of Jesus' life here on earth. And Jesus didn't come to be catered to, didn't come to have the best things. Jesus came to serve. And so here's Jesus who says that he had no place to lay his head, at least at times, Luke 9, verse 58. Jesus came to serve God, and he came to serve others, not live in the lap of luxury and be served. Now, although he did this in many ways, his willingness to serve others was sacrificial to the point of laying his life down to ransom us from sin. In the same way, the heart of a servant does not seek self-exaltation, or it doesn't seek others to serve us, but is sacrificially willing to do what is in the best interest of others. That is the example of Jesus and his willingness to serve. One more example for us to look at, and that is in John, the 13th chapter. And maybe this is one of the first things that we think about when it comes to Jesus serving. John 13, verses 1 through 7, or 1 through 17. It says, "Before the Passover festival, Jesus knew that his hour had come to depart from this world to the Father. Having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end. Now, when it was time for supper, the devil had already put it into the heart of Judas, Simon Iscariot's son, to betray him. Jesus knew that the Father had given everything into his hands, that he had come from God, and that he was going back to God. So he got up from supper, laid aside his outer clothing, took a towel, and tied it around himself. Next, he poured water into a basin and began to wash his disciples' feet and to dry them with the towel tied around him. He came to Simon Peter, who asked him, 'Lord, are you going to wash my feet?' Jesus answered him, 'What I'm doing you don't realize now, but afterward you will understand.' 'You will never wash my feet,' Peter said. Jesus replied, 'If I don't wash you, you have no part with me.' Simon said to him, 'Lord, not only my feet, but also my hands and my head.' 'One who has bathed,' Jesus told him, "doesn't need to wash anything except his feet. But he is completely clean. You are clean, but not all of you,' for he knew who would betray him. This is why he said, 'Not all of you are clean.' When Jesus had washed their feet and put on his outer clothing, he reclined again and said to them, 'Do you know what I have done for you? You call me teacher and Lord, and you are speaking rightly, since that is what I am. So if I, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also ought to wash one another's feet. For I have given you an example, that you also should do just as I have done for you. Truly I tell you, a servant is not greater than his master, and a messenger is not greater than the one who sent him. If you know these things, you are blessed if you do them." Now, at some point surrounding the Passover meal, Jesus shared with his disciples prior to his crucifixion, Jesus' disciples started arguing again about which of them should be considered the greatest. Go read Luke chapter 22, verses 24 through 30. And it is perhaps after this argument that occurs among his disciples, that these series of events that we just described occurs. Though his disciples argued for prestige, Jesus, the Master, took a servant's job by washing his disciples' feet. Can you imagine the scene? Arguing about being the greatest, and here's your Lord, here's your Master, getting up, putting a towel around him, and washing feet. Jesus demonstrated through this that if their Master was willing to do the lowly job of washing feet, then they should also do this for one another. Therefore, Jesus did not consider himself as being too great to serve anyone, including Judas, who would soon betray him as you go on to verses 18 through 30. And Jesus knew Judas was going to betray him, but he washed his feet anyways. Furthermore, Jesus taught that knowing about the need to serve others, it's not enough to bring true blessings. Instead, the actual serving is required. Don't just know it, but do it. And therefore, there is no one we should be unwilling to serve, and no good thing we should be unwilling to do for others. Jesus served. Imitating Jesus requires that you serve like Jesus served. Although there's much more that could be discussed, we have seen Jesus' service in different contexts throughout his earthly life. Ultimately, Jesus served the Father by doing his will, and then served others in many ways during his time on this earth, ultimately by sacrificing himself for us that we can be saved. Therefore, Jesus' disciples must learn to humbly and sacrificially serve God in every possible way, and then serve the needs of others in this world.